All right. Thank you for coming to Second Chance Day, and thank you to Central Presbyterian Church for hosting us. My name is Ann Colleton. I'm the Policy and Outreach Coordinator at the Georgia Justice Project. So I wanted to acknowledge the co-host organizations that we partnered with to host Second Chance Day. So that's the Inner City Muslim Action Network, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the National Incarceration Association, Southern Center for Human Rights, Report Injustice Georgia, the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, New Life Second Chances, and the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I think you saw the food over there, food and drink. There are restrooms through that door underneath the clock, and then there's arrows to direct you to the bathrooms. In that room, there is some literature, some information about the co-host organizations, and I think that is it. And I am going to introduce Representative Kim Schofield from the 60th District in Atlanta, who is here to speak about the issues that we all care about here this morning.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you for being here at your state capitol. I am Representative Kim Schofield, and I represent the Great District 60, and I tell people I'm always going to be a part of everyone in your life, because how many of you have been through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport? Well, that's my district, so the next time you go through, say, hey, Rep. Kim, and I'll hear you. And I represent East Point, College Park, Forest Park, Southeast Atlanta, and Hapeville. And I am just going to say just a few words to thank you again for the work that you do. Record's redemption is so important to me. I just learned about that new term from my friend Marilyn Wynn. And to make sure that everybody is given a second chance. We all have done things, and once you have satisfied the requirements, I believe it's a human value to restore us back to the community and civic engagement, and just as human beings. So again, I thank you for being here today. Although the Capitol and we're out on session, well, not session, but we're out working on the budget this week, we want to make sure that we continue to expand rights and do the right thing for the right reason at all times. And we can't do that without your voice. So again, it's important that you're here today. Thanks for the work in the community. Thanks for the impact. And listen, have a great day. I am about to run to another committee meeting, but if you know anything about me, Kim stands for Keep It Moving.
All right. Well, the first portion of our program is about expanding voting rights for people with felony convictions, and so I would like to introduce John Paul Taylor of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. So we talk about, she just talked about one of the most, us expanding our rights, right? And one of the most important things as citizens, one of the most fundamental rights that we have is voting, right? And again, I want us to all remember that voting is a right. It is not a privilege. It's something we're all born with, right? And a lot of my work takes me across all 5 southern states that Southern Poverty Law Center works in: Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. And the South, I can honestly say, when we talk about disenfranchisement of voting rights, there's 6.1 million individuals that are actually disenfranchised from voting in the United States right now. Right? That is huge, right? And when you think about the politics and what's happening right now, think about if those individuals actually had the ability to vote. And one of the things I really want to say is, in doing my work, one of the myths that I can honestly say that is not true is when you talk about people, they'll say people with felony convictions don't want to vote. They don't care. I would absolutely say that is false. A lot of it is misinformation or no information. Meaning, a lot of times I ask, well, who told you you couldn't vote? And they'll say, well, I just thought I could, right? Because nobody accurately explains the laws to individuals, and that's one, I always say knowledge is power, right? Learning and understanding your rights, all your rights, is truly important. And they'll say, well, how does that affect, how does the laws affect me? Well, we talk about, a lot of times we look at it in terms of just voting for the president, right? I simply make statements like, well, think about this. If you're standing in front of a judge, like in the state of Alabama, we're still electing our judges, right? You think about in states where the DA races, things like that, right? Like these are individuals that you're actually standing in front of, and by you voting, that is your power, because at least you're giving, you're having an opportunity to have people, you're standing in front of people that may be a little bit more favorable to your plight than not, right? Well, where does a lot of this come from? A lot of this is so historical, right? When we talk about moral turpitude, so in the state of Georgia, well, in the United States Supreme Court defines moral turpitude provision is meant to single out actions that are contrary to justice, honesty, modesty, or good morals. So Georgia law states that anyone convicted of a crime of moral turpitude would lose their voting rights. However, it does not clearly define what moral turpitude means. As a result, the loss of civil rights is applied to all felony convictions, regardless of the crime. And that's very important, especially considering that Georgia has the 10th highest rate of disenfranchisement in the country. Do you all understand that? 266,000 Georgians couldn't vote due to felony disenfranchisement in 2018. We know a lot of the elections that recently happened in this state, the margin was sure less than that, right? And could have swung and changed some things, right? So a lot of what we're trying to do is really galvanize and move the people that are most affected by this, meaning the impacted citizen, right? Really empowering them to make these changes and be the champion, be the leader in pushing, because the reason lawmakers don't make changes because the people don't advocate and push for it. Right? And so we have to do, so part of my job is making sure is going out into the community to mobilize citizens and for us to move forward and pushing in this. And I say it because it all works on a level. We have to have litigation, we have to have legislation, but we also have to have the community actually speaking up and being the voice of all of this. To say that it matters. It matters to an individual, because when I say, every time I see an individual that lost their voting rights, a lot of us take that for granted. But when I see an individual that lost their voting rights and then be able to regain their voting rights, the power that it gives them to then move forward, to then get their other rights back, right? And then move forward, it's an empowering tool, not just to go in the ballot box and vote. That is a great thing, but it's also a mental thing, right? That we have to take in terms of, because they're not just a checkbox. They are human beings and they are citizens, and they deserve the same privileges and rights. If they paid their debt to society, they should have the same rights and privileges that anyone else has, right? Now, when we talk about this, and I say this because I watch it happen. I watch it happen in Louisiana, where just recently they, by impacted citizens-led coalitions, they were able to get the legislature to change the law to help restore the voting rights of so many of the individuals with felony convictions in the state of Louisiana. Florida, we know about Amendment 4. That was an actual impacted citizen-led fight, and it took a while, but they didn't stop and they didn't give up in making sure that the legislator, that a law was passed to actually be able to restore the voting rights of so many individuals with felony convictions. In the state of Alabama, that actually has, they created a actual list of disenfranchising laws that and one of the things that's important to note about Alabama that I hope Georgia takes true note of is that one of the things that they did not put on the list of disqualified convictions were drug convictions and most nonviolent offenses. And I think that is something to be noted because that would truly empower and give the rights back of so many individuals and help them move forward in their life, right? And so when we say that, so I say, well, I work from the community standpoint in trying to empower individuals and making it happen. And then we also have to have, like I say, the legislation to move to change the law, right? And making that happen. So right now, I'm actually honored and privileged to bring up Senator Harold Jones to actually talk about what he plans to do with that.
Good morning.
Morning.
So right now it's 9:30. So I'm a lawyer by trade. I represent the Sheriff's Department in Richmond County. I used to be a prosecutor. I used to be the solicitor for Augusta also. So it's 9:30. So right now in courtrooms across Georgia, the first speeches are starting to be given. They're given by judges. They're given by prosecutors. They're in somebody's office, given by probation officers, parole officers. And those speeches all take the same form. And that is, today, Mr. Jones, you're not going to go to jail, but you're going to have to go get your GED. You're going to have to, if you have children, pay child support. If you hadn't finished high school, either you're going to have to go back to high school. If you're in college, you're a college student, and you got caught for drugs, you better stay in school. You better abide by your parents. All of these speeches, and you also better go get a job. And then, of course, the IRS says that you better pay taxes on that. So these speeches will continue throughout the day, and these threats will be made throughout the day. You better do these things or I'm going to put you in jail. The question then becomes, what is the purpose of giving that speech? If the purpose of giving that speech, stay in school, get your GED, get a job, pay child support if you have children, be a productive citizen, if the purpose of that speech is to bring persons back into society, so to speak, and make them productive, but the fact is that they just need a little bit of supervision, if that's the purpose of that speech that's going on throughout Georgia today, if we think that those things make a person a productive citizen, why then would we disenfranchise people, which we know is a sign of being a productive citizen? Now, if the purpose of that speech is to just have landmines that a person might fall over so then we can revoke them and put them in jail, then we understand why we're disenfranchising persons. Because the purpose of that speech isn't really that we're trying to integrate persons back into society and they just need supervision to do that. The purpose of that speech is not that we actually want them to be productive citizens and having a job, paying child support, getting GED. Those are things that help become a productive citizen, and that is good for society at large. So no prosecutor, no judge would say the purpose of that speech today is to create landmines to stop to revoke people. They would all say the purpose is to make them a better person for society. Then if that is the case, They should be on the front line of this issue, quite frankly, leading the charge to make sure that we don't disenfranchise people if they're convicted of a felony, especially a nonviolent felony. Because there can be no greater test whether a person is going to be a productive citizen than going out and actually go vote. Because you don't have to be a convicted felon to not want to go vote. It takes a lot for people to go vote. We know that. Because in this primary season, we might have 35-40% turnout. The general election, of course, would be much higher, but many midterms other than the one that we had prior is going to normally just be 50% turnout. So when people go vote, they are engaged. They are engaged citizens. So to take that away from them says that you're trying to actually prevent them from being engaged. But when persons actually go do that, they're very much engaged in society. So you don't want to actually take that right away. So since no prosecutor, no judge would say the purpose of that speech is a landmine, then the question only becomes how do we actually framework a good bill and a good law to allow persons to keep the franchise. And so what I did last year was two things. I did what's called Senate Bill 11, which basically said if you're convicted of a drug-related felony, and we just use drugs only, that person would not lose the opportunity to vote. And I did that just to start the conversation, because I knew that would at least start the conversation. And then the second piece that I did was did a study committee to study the issue. And then therefore we could kind of come out through the study committee with a better idea how we really want to structure the bill. So the initial bill, of course, didn't go very far, which I knew. That was just to get the media coverage and things of that nature. But we did pass a study committee, and we did actually have a study committee. We went around the state, and many groups that are in here were very active in helping out with that study committee, and I think it did a great job of bringing arguments together, so it was good. The result of that study is actually to keep things status quo. So basically, you don't have the opportunity to vote if you're on probation or parole and, of course, incarcerated. That was not necessarily surprising. The key point was that it gave people an opportunity to hone their arguments together, and it gave me an opportunity to try to fashion a more broader bill. And so now that is being finished up today. And so what is SB 11 will actually be a different bill. And it will follow the Alabama model to some extent, where we actually list out the felonies that would be convictions for moral turpitude. As we know, we don't define what moral turpitude is. Alabama listed out the felonies, and they just said that these things are going to be moral turpitude. And that's exactly what we've done. And we've come up with 73 potential offenses. Now that's more than Alabama, but there's a reason why that's more. Because actually, one of the criticisms of Alabama was it didn't include a lot of white-collar crimes. We included a lot of white-collar crimes. I didn't want to leave those kind of offenses out. So it may seem like it's more, but it actually is not more, because it's more, but it's more in a good way if you're going to do it. I don't necessarily believe in disenfranchisement at all, but the key is we got to start somewhere. We have to start. We got to get something passed. So we can take the attitude and just say everybody should have it. It's never going to fly in Georgia. The question becomes, how do you actually try to move something forward? So if we're going to list them out, I didn't want to just list them out in what we call, I guess, blue-collar crimes, but those that are going to be affected more for African Americans or persons of color. So we have a lot of white-collar crimes in there, all felonies. So 73 of them. Inevitably, I had a question yesterday to say, well, what kind of offenses would not be in there? Well, most of your nonviolent offenses, of course, would not be in there. Things like shoplifting, all your drug offenses would not be in there. Transportation of illegal aliens, for one, is not in there. Having a high level of THC oil is not in there. It's difficult to go through the whole list, because one of the things I brought this big white notebook, and there's another one to go with it. What I did was I actually just copied the whole criminal code and went through each offense one by one and made a decision which one we actually ought to do. So it's hard for me to actually go through a list and say, well, this won't be in there, that won't be in there. But what I'm trying to do basically is develop a list that will be amenable to persons, unless, of course, you just don't want persons that have the opportunity to vote. So that's what we have proposed. The next step would be to have the way we've been doing it this year, have a hearing only. That would be the next step. And then the second step would be So you have the hearing only, kind of figure out what's the problems with the bill, if any, and then the second step would bring it up to an up and down vote. And quite frankly, I don't want to stop at a hearing only, even if the up and down vote would not be successful, because I really want to put persons on record that they oppose this particular legislation, because there's really no logical reason to oppose this legislation. For instance, shoplifting in Georgia felony is $300. So if a person has $250 worth of material, they have a misdemeanor, they get to vote. But if it's over $300, that person doesn't get to vote. There's no rhyme or logic to that. Misdemeanor marijuana is 1 ounce, but if you have 1.5 ounces, you're a felon, so now you don't get to vote. There's no rhyme or logic to that. If you're charged with possession of cocaine, for instance, you don't get to vote, but if you have 2 prior DUIs where you actually put people's lives in danger, you get to vote. There's no rhyme or logic to that. So what we're trying to do is actually show that if anybody, to me, votes against this, knowing that Alabama has done something similar, Mississippi has done something similar, then really you just don't want to increase the franchise. Inevitably, one of the questions that will come up will be about changing elections. Well, 2 things to answer to that. Number 1, there will be language in the bill that actually will not make it effective July 1, but probably January 1 of 2021. So the rules will not have changed for this particular election. But then number 2, when you look at nonviolent offenses and you're talking about drug offenses and you're talking about some property offenses, it's probably going to be about 90,000 people that will be affected. Well, let's assume just about 1/2 of those go register, just like the normal population. That's about 50,000, and then if you take 30 to 40% of those actually going to go vote, and all of those persons are not necessarily Democrat, it doesn't necessarily automatically change any kind of election. So what we've done is, I think, created a bill to show, because when you look at the numbers, no one's going to be able to say, oh, it's going to change the election. You're trying to get Stacey Abrams elected. No, you're not going to be able to show that. The numbers will not add up to that. So what we're doing is showing, if there's a no vote on this, you just basically don't want persons to keep the franchise to vote. And that's what we're trying to put out there. And I'll leave with just a couple of quick statements about one of the reasons why I'm so passionate on this, and I also have a bill dealing with possession of marijuana, trying to lessen the penalties for that. Just read you a couple of things. Most persons receive fine or probation now for drug offenses. Most jurisdictions now only focus on trafficking for drug offenses. Drug use is normally a private activity in your home. The social impact occurs only when it's irresponsible behavior. Now that may sound like a progressive prosecutor 2020, but that actually is the statements made in 1970 by the Nixon Commission on Drug Use. This drug war, which I've just been very passionate about opposing, has been completely unnecessary. 1970, they were basically saying there's no reason to start talking about prosecuting persons for simple possession of any drugs. But look how we've not changed anything and actually made more draconian laws in those basically 50 years. That's why this is such an important issue that we have to continue to push, especially here in Georgia, in all states, quite frankly. Because when we start talking about non-violent offenses, mostly drug offenses, even property offenses for drugs especially though, it's been an unnecessary waste of time and material and lives. Destruction of lives, destruction of families, when we already had established in 1970 that it was unnecessary. But politics, simple politics, put all that to a side, and generations of Americans have been destroyed for nothing. And that is why we have to continue to go forward. And I'll leave at this. One issue that I've seen, I've been in legislation now 5 years. I think progressive groups have to be just as single-minded as conservative groups. Never give up, never stop, just keep pushing and keep pounding. Don't allow just to say, well, we got a hearing this year, we're fine, and it goes off the radar screen. That's the one thing that I think I've been somewhat taken aback by, is that we're not pushing as hard on a lot of these issues. These are not just civil rights issues, these are human rights issues. And we're also going to be talking about expungements. These are human rights issues that we need to be embracing and going forward on. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Good morning. Good morning. This session was supposed to have been 10 minutes ago, so I'm going to do as my grandmother said. I'm going to be brief and be seated, okay? But I do want to make sure that we cover what I think is very important. Senator Jones just had a seat. He's one of our celebrated politicians who understand. But how many of you know that he is an exception, not the rule, right? And so what that means when we talk about organizing change around these issues is something very simple. And that means that most of the time, the change that we need in our community will not happen through our rhetoric. It happens when we get organized. Repeat after me. Say, we must get organized. We must get organized. That's the only way that change has ever really significantly happened. That's the only way it's going to happen around this issue. I'm not going to take up too much time, but to say that part of what that strategy needs to look like for all of us in this room who've been organizing around this issue and important issues like it is a threefold strategy. That is that we have to come together to educate, agitate, and then mobilize. Educate, agitate, and then mobilize. We have to educate people so that they understand about the issue through forums like this, and to take it out into the streets and into the communities, the people who may not have the leisurely time that we all have to come here and be a part of things like this, find ways to communicate this message there through our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, and our temples. And we also have to have the ability then to agitate, to create some disruption, right? We have to understand that in order for us to bring about the change that we need, we have to disrupt systems and let voices be heard, center the voice of impacted persons, and take those voices in places that make some people feel uncomfortable, and unhouse some people who have been closed in their own theological positions on some of these things or their own philosophical positions, and let people know that restorative justice cannot just be a good talking point. It needs to be a communal practice. And that happens through agitation sometimes. And then finally, we have to mobilize people. And it goes to what the point was being made by Senator Jones, to mobilize people, which means that we have to have some consistency. We have to show up, and we have to continue to show up. And we have to continue to show up. And we have to continue to show up and raise our voices so that they know that we will not go quietly. You can't just end the committee. You can't just appease us by saying that we'll pass it on through another study report. We have to show up, and we have to demand that action be taken, because it's just that serious. And I thank everyone here for being here, but if there is particularly a particular type of person here that I want to think about, that's these persons who have been impacted by this, because I want to thank you for your commitment to saying that you're going to fight and you're not just going to take it, but you're going to let your voice be heard, and you're going to stand up for people who sit in your position. And for those who are not registered to vote in the room, because it starts with that, the first way that you can begin to organize around this issue is to become an engaged citizen. And so finally, I want to say, if you are not registered to vote in this room, right? If you're not registered to vote in this room, don't leave here today without getting registered to vote. Because part of our mobilization begins with letting people know that our fight for human and civil rights is in part a fight at the ballot box. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. The New Georgia Project would love to help if you want to get mobilized.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Tariq Bayina. I'm a community organizer with Iman Atlanta Inner City Muslim Action Network. I want to thank Senator Jones for coming out today and explaining to us all that's being done in from the legislative standpoint here in Georgia, and John Paul and Reverend Honor. Also, I'm a directly impacted individual. I'm one of the people that they're talking about. So I spent 15 years in Georgia's Department of Correction. And before I had done that, I wasn't necessarily interested in voting. Maybe I registered once, but I didn't actually make it to the polls for the Bush-Gore election. So I wasn't enthusiastic about it. I got enthusiastic, and my case is not unique. I got enthusiastic about it because when I went in, and after I was sentenced, I started doing some studying. I went to the law library, right? That's where the first place you go when you get locked up. You go to the law library, find out how you can get out. I went to the law library and I went to digging in, and one of the things that I found was that one of the bills, or the bill that I had been sentenced under, was written by a legislator, right? Co-authored by, it was written by Mark Taylor. If you know who Mark Taylor is. It was SB 441, SB 440. And I had been sentenced under that bill, and I didn't think it was fair. And I began to come to the realization that, you know, these are elected officials who are up here writing these bills that impact me and people like me, yet I have no voice in it. I haven't been participating in it. They've been sliding these things in under our noses, and I had no idea, I didn't realize how important that was to me. My case, like I say, is not unique. I wasn't the only one who started to begin looking at legislation and looking at the laws that had been impacting us. And so I say that to say that there are many people who in prison who may not have been interested in voting, but because of the situation are now extremely invested into the process. And had they had the opportunity when they come out to be able to engage the process, they would. So I'm going to say, right now I'm on probation, I'm on parole, and I have many years probation after my parole sentence is complete. So I won't be able to vote as it stands right now for over 15 years. I won't be able to engage in that process. I'm going to be brief here because we have to move on. I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that that's fair. One reason is because, and if you've heard me speak before, you've heard me say this, is that I'm a citizen, right? I'm a citizen. And not only am I a citizen, but I'm not on the street and fortunate enough to have a job, and I'm paying taxes. I'm paying taxes. Now, if you will recall, one of the most important reasons why the American Revolution was fought was on one basic premise. That premise was no taxation without representation. I don't want to get all into all of the details about this stuff. The senator already talked. He spoke about moral turpitude and where he stands, and that being a beginning. But I believe that, and I agree with him, that there should be felony disenfranchisement, particularly for people who are out on the street right now and are paying their taxes and living in communities, and every day are trying to make a better life for themselves. So if I'm going to be able to pay your taxes, you're going to take that out of my check, I think I should be able to make a vote. I think I should be able to cast a vote. And that's as simple as that. I mean, you can't get more, you can't get more simple than that. Now, I'm not going to, I got to go because she told me 1 minute. I can go on forever. But I just want to leave that with you here today. And hopefully tell your friend and tell a friend. We're organizing, as Reverend Honor said today, to make sure we can go out and get those people who are eligible to vote right now, who are felons, registered, so they can get into those booths and cast their ballot. All right, thank you.
Good morning. I am Brenda Smeaton. I'm the legal director of Georgia Justice Project. I just want to say thank you to Tariq and John Paul and Senator Jones and Reverend Honor for speaking to us about voting. We are going to transition to the part of our program that is going to talk about expanding expungement in Georgia. And because we're running a little bit behind, which is to be expected with the weather in Atlanta, we're going to switch up the schedule a little bit. And we're going to start with Representative Houston Gaines, who represents District 117 in Athens, and he has been working closely with us at Georgia Justice Project on a bill that's going to be hopefully subbed this week or next week, and we'll be telling you a lot more about that. So Representative Gates?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much all for being here. It's a great crowd and really appreciate what you're doing. It's important, the work that's going on. Appreciate Georgia Justice Project, Brenda, Lisa, Doug, and the whole team. We've had many meetings in Athens and really appreciate the work that they're doing and excited about the legislation that we're going to be moving forward on this year to try to make sure that folks get a second chance they deserve. It's an issue that for economic development, for employment, for so many reasons, it's critical for our state, and it's been interesting working on the legislation. The companies, the chambers, everybody recognizes this is an important step forward for our state, and I believe is it 40 states that already have these sort of provisions in place, and so Georgia, we have work to do, and I feel confident that this year we're going to get an important bill through the process. I've really enjoyed working with the team. As she said, we're hoping over the next week or so to get a bill subbed in. It's a little confusing how the process works, but very excited about where we are. Chairman Mandy Ballinger, myself, and the team have been working closely on this along with prosecutors across the state to try to find language that makes sense for everybody. And I feel really good about where we are. We've had buy-in from leadership across the aisle on both sides of the Capitol and all floors of the Capitol. So I feel really good about it and excited about the legislation moving forward. I believe it's House Bill 528 is the bill that we'll be working with, and we've developed legislation that we'll be substituting in that makes a lot of sense for everybody. So really excited about it, looking forward to working with you all because this really is an important issue that's going to change lives across this state. A couple weeks ago I was in an event in Barrow County, so I represent parts of Clark, Oconee, Jackson, and Barrow counties. Not sure if there's anybody from the Athens area here. Got a couple folks, great. Hey Deborah, how are you? But I was in an event in Barrow County, the Literacy Ball, which is always a great event in Barrow County, and they've started doing GED classes in the prison there, which is unbelievable what they're doing, that organization. And one of the folks who was going through the program gave her story. And she has a felony conviction on her record, a drug-related felony conviction, and an employer took a chance on her, and it's worked out great. She's been able to work with her kids again and just raising them, and it was amazing to hear her story. But individuals deserve a second chance for things that have been on their record. It's really important, and so I'm confident that we're going to get something done this year. And again, it's bipartisan. It just makes sense. And so I look forward to working on it with the team, and anything we can do moving forward, please let us know. But thank you all for being here, and look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
I have a misdemeanor on my record, and the misdemeanor on my record is holding me back. I paid my restitution for the crime. I served my probation for the crime, and I'm still having trouble finding employment.
4.2 million people in Georgia have a criminal record. So you're talking about almost 40% of working age adults. So the impact is tremendous on individuals and on the economy.
The collateral consequences of having a record are almost endless whenever you think about navigating the labor market. Whenever you have a record, you essentially have a stain that follows you throughout every job interview, every job application, that prohibits you from earning an income that makes you a bigger contributor to the economy.
The difficulties that I have really is literally finding a decent job based on my overall education level, my experience. Sometimes it takes your confidence to even want to even try to apply for a position, because you pretty much know what the outcome is going to be when you sit down in that room and they say, well, tell us about your past.
There are a lot of jobs out there in Georgia that need to be filled, particularly for sort of middle skills jobs, not just entry-level minimum wage jobs. We need to fill those jobs, so individuals need to be able to further their education and move into those positions.
I am wanting to get in a program at DeKalb Medical for radiology. I want to eventually get work in a hospital, retire from a hospital, but with that on my background, no hospitals will hire me.
In Georgia, we're seeing a huge decline in labor force participation. There are a lot of folks out there who are not going to work or looking for work. And one of the reasons that we're seeing that happen is because a lot of folks simply can't participate in the workforce or don't feel included in the workforce. And that's because of a criminal record.
We've had a real change in the way criminal records are considered in employment and housing over the last 15 or 20 years. So an individual may have had a job or a place to live and their record wasn't an issue, and then they get laid off or transition to something else, and then their record becomes a huge problem for them, even though it may be very old.
I have a record from 22 years ago, and I'm not able to get an apartment or get back into housing or buying my own because of my background check from 22 years back.
Georgia's law is very limited compared to other states. In about 40 states, and it's an ever-growing list, individuals can move on from their record. They can get a real second chance because they can have a combination of misdemeanors and felonies removed from their record.
The current state of the laws in Georgia are really disappointing in that there's a desire to move farther, but I believe that there's also this hesitancy to feel as if they're soft on crime. But the reality is that an individual has already served their sentence, and we still punish them and bring them back into the prison. It may not be a physical prison, but it's a prison of opportunity. And so I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to wake up and look that, we have the largest rate of individuals under criminal justice control in the country. And that really just holds the state back because it holds people back.
We want Georgia to expand what can come off of your record. We think most misdemeanors should be eligible to come off of your record after a number of years, and we think many felonies, if they're not serious violent felonies, should be able to come off of your record if you've demonstrated that you're rehabilitated by not getting in trouble again.
I'm a 35-year-old mother. I'm married. I have a 16-year-old son. I have a college degree. I have a career with a reputable company, and that record indicates otherwise. It isn't even connected in any way with who I am today. And so, in my opinion, it's completely irrelevant.
We have to recognize that people change, and that mistakes that somebody might have made, even if they're serious mistakes, people can change. If somebody has done their time and has since then been a good citizen and kept their nose clean, that we ought to provide an opportunity for those people to get their records expunged so that they can get a job and so they can provide for their family.
We all sin and fall short of God's glory. And so we're all challenged on a daily basis to forgive others. And so yes, it can be difficult and it can be a challenge to want to forgive others who may have done more harm to the community, more harm to others. But yet we are challenged to do that.
People change, people's situations change, people's lives change, and a lot of times it's for the better. And I'm one of those people. I want to make something of myself, and I just need that chance.
So I do want to thank the folks that were involved with that video, aside from Jenny filming it, Reverend Elliot Robinson, who I know is here with us today, Reverend Dr. Lewis Ferguson, Alex Cammerdell from GBPI is featured in it, and a special thanks to the brave folks who have a record and were willing to share their story and talk about that on the video. So we will be getting that out to you as soon as we get back to our office, and please share the link with other folks as well. So, since we are going to hear the video would set up kind of, why this is important, but I think we're going to hear a lot of that information from our panelists, and we want to make sure that we leave enough time to hear your stories, the people, particularly from people who have a record. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of where we are with our efforts to expand expungement. And just as a preliminary matter, sometimes our campaign uses the word expungement. Sometimes you'll hear us say restriction and sealing. Most folks know the record clearing process as expungement. That's what they call it in most states. Georgia doesn't actually use the word expungement in our law as of 2013. It's a process, it's a two-step process called restriction and sealing, because we're actually restricting access to the criminal history, not destroying it. Restricting it so that employers and housing providers and other decision makers can't get it, but it remains available to law enforcement. So you'll hear us going back and forth. Expungement is the term everybody knows, but when you go talk to your lawmakers, you probably want to talk to them about restriction and sealing and expanding that. And I know when Maisie Lynn comes up, she will talk more about what that's going to look like. So just wanted to give a brief overview. We have had some improvements in Georgia's criminal records laws over the last 8 years. The legislature made it easier to restrict and seal non-convictions. For the first time, they allowed some convictions to be expunged, and that was for people that they define as youthful offenders, so people that were convicted of a misdemeanor before they turned 21. Under the current law, we can get some of them off after a number of years. We created a law that would allow first offender records to be sealed, and we worked with the legislature on something called retroactive first offender. So if you didn't get first offender on the front end, you might be able to go back and get rid of your conviction. So these reforms are great, but they leave a lot of people out. They are all backward looking. They are all about what was going on at the time the person was convicted and not who that person is today. So that's why we are trying to expand expungement of convictions to recognize rehabilitation and where folks are. So momentum has really been building around this issue. In 2018, Georgia Justice Project, we took the issue to the Council on Criminal Justice Reform, and they were supportive. They included it as one of the issues that they thought the legislature should move forward on. Unfortunately, it didn't make it into the final criminal justice bill that year. But last year, momentum continued to build. There were 6 different record clearing bills that were introduced. And in a minute, I'm going to have one of our representatives who introduced one of those bills come up and talk a little bit about it. Unfortunately, of the 6 bills that were introduced, only one of them, HB 528, which is the bill that Representative Gaines referenced when he was speaking, that was the only one to get a committee hearing, but it wasn't voted out of committee. So we didn't get very far last year. So at Georgia Justice Project, we certainly wallowed in our disappointment for a week or two and then tried to figure out where do we go from here. We know that there are hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of people around the state that care about this issue. The latest data from GCIC, the Georgia Crime Information Center, that tracks who has a criminal history, shows over 440,000 people in Georgia have a criminal history. So we started the Second Chance for Georgia campaign, and many of you are with organizations that have endorsed that campaign. So far, our list is at 67, and we want to continue to grow that list. So if there are organizations or congregations that are committed to this issue and service providers, please get in touch with me or Ann, and we would love to add them to the list and mobilize their stakeholders as well. Also, over the last year, since our disappointment last year, we have been hitting the road. We have met with over 30 legislators and 25 prosecutors around the state. Particularly our executive director, Doug Amar, who's going to be coming up in a minute, has put, for sure, thousands of miles on his car traveling to South and West and East Georgia. And one other thing that I want to mention is we've also met with thousands of people who have a record to get their feedback. As Representative Gaines mentioned, we've met with employers, chambers of commerce, judges, and other state agencies as well. One of the ways that we've been trying to raise awareness about this is through these events called Record Restriction Summits, which some of you may have heard of. I know some of you have heard because you've helped host them. So there's been about 35 of these events around the state over the last couple of days, and they are events where people can come and get their record restricted and sealed. if it's eligible under the current law in one day without paying anything. So at Georgia Justice Project, we've been there at almost all of these events, and we've been happy to partner. But we've also said it's usually the prosecutors that are hosting these events. We said to the prosecutors, we are so happy to partner with you, but wouldn't it be great if we could do something aside from expunge dismissed offenses, which is what these events primarily do right now. Wouldn't it be great if we could provide a real second chance through these events? And I think seeing people and meeting people who are dealing with their record has helped to shift the minds of some prosecutors. This year, momentum continued to build. There were 2 additional record-clearing bills introduced in the Senate. So now there's 8 pending bills out there. As Representative Gaines mentioned, we have been working on one particular bill which was introduced last year, which is HB 528, and we anticipate that new language for that bill will be introduced next week or at the end of this week. We've also been working with the Southern Center for Human Rights and the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers on a draft that takes into account the feedback that we received from lawmakers and prosecutors, state agencies, and other stakeholders around the state. So we think that it has a good chance. It doesn't do everything that we would like it to do, but we do think it's what's feasible right now. So what is this draft going to do? Misdemeanor convictions, it is going to allow people to expunge almost all misdemeanor convictions from their record 4 years after they complete their sentence. So there are a few exceptions in the law, but there's no limit on the number of misdemeanors that a person could petition the court to expunge from their record. So most misdemeanors would be able to come off. Felony convictions, there are a few more exceptions in felonies. If you wouldn't be eligible for first offender, then you're not going to be eligible for restriction expungement under this law. So we're excluding serious violent felonies, certain sex crimes, and crimes against vulnerable children, vulnerable populations such as children and the elderly. But all other offenses would be included. So 5 years after you are off paper, after you complete your sentence, you would be able to petition the court to expunge your record and seal it. Another huge leap forward, we think, is in our work with the chambers, and particularly in employers. They have asked for some additional protections to make it easier for them to hire people with a criminal record. So hopefully that language will pass as well. If you've looked at any, you know that many of them include something called automatic restriction, which is where we had hoped to go in Georgia. This is a trend around the country right now, often called clean slate reform. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we have the buy-in yet. There are some issues in Georgia, one budgetary issues with reprogramming our system. And also, Georgia doesn't have a unified court record system like the other states that have passed this reform. But we think it's really important, and we're going to continue to push for that, because the reality is a lot of people are in other states that are eligible for expungement don't take advantage of it because they can't afford an attorney or they're not comfortable representing themselves. So the remedy is going unused in a lot of places. One thing that this group will have to do after we win in a couple of months is come back together and figure out how do we make sure everyone around the state, in all corners of the state, can access this remedy, and how can we mobilize volunteers and volunteer attorneys to do that. So, of course, that's just one bill. That's the bill that we're focusing on at Georgia Justice Project. We will post updates about movement on any of the bills, the other bills that are pending. We support any effort to expand second chances. So we have a lot of work left to do in the next 2 months. Be on the lookout for action alerts from Ann. I am here the rest of the day to answer any specific questions you have about the bill, and when the language actually drops, we will certainly send everyone a link to that, and we can send everyone a link to all the other bills that are pending as well. So I am looking forward to celebrating with all of you in a couple of months. I really feel like we are close this year. And now I'm going to ask Representative Kennard to come up and speak for a few minutes about his work in this area.
I'm Greg Kennard, Gwinnett County Representative, District 102. I came to the Georgia Assembly by way of my work as a minister and a nonprofit executive. I founded Inspire Outreach, which is at once a church, 21 years, and we started transitional programming to end homelessness about 14 years ago, and since then we've helped thousands of people, assisting them to get out of a state of homelessness. A typical client of ours, low literacy rate, mental health diagnosis, suffers with addiction, and a felony record. So as we were mobilizing folks from the streets or from their home insecurity state, we kept running into some of the same barriers, and that's a lot of them had to do with criminal justice. We were finding a hard time finding employment for folks because of a criminal record, housing because of a criminal record. And so when I looked, did a deep dive of what was the root causes of all of this, it brought me to the Gold Dome. So in 2018, I threw my name in the hat and fortunately won. But this was the express purpose by which I ran for office. So I'm an ally and I'm here with you. I'm optimistic. I do feel a momentum shift. I feel like we're moving towards a more just Georgia, a more merciful Georgia. So I appreciate everybody lifting your voices. I feel a real synergy that we're going to see some very progressive days ahead of us. Another area that I'm working on is child support debt. I'm dropping a bill here in just a few days. Someone who's being released, oftentimes that child support debt has been accrued while they were incarcerated. So as soon as you get an entry-level job, half that check is taken because of child support debt. It's very self-defeating for a person who's trying to get back on their feet, and sometimes they just quit and start working under the table as a result. So my bill, it waives child support while the person is incarcerated. And then upon release, they have 60 days to go in front of a judge for that child support debt to be modified to something that represents their current financial position. So it serves both directions. One, it helps the person who is released and re-entering society, helps them get back on their feet in a reasonable way, but also gets some much needed funds to the family who otherwise are not getting the funds anyway. There's over $2 billion of child support debt that's unpaid, and it's because of this particular policy and legislation that's in place. So the child support bill, from my view, will really help that situation, help get money to families, and help the returning citizen get back on their feet in a measurable way. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kennard. All right, we are going to transition to our panel now. I do want to say a thank you to the lawmakers. There were some lawmakers that couldn't make it over today, but I do want to mention that Representative Mandy Ballinger from Canton is going to be the lead sponsor on HB 528. She's working closely with Representative Gaines, who spoke, and she's also the chair of the Juvenile Justice Committee and is leading the charge to raise the age, so certainly you may want to get engaged in that issue as well. Right now, I'm going to bring up our Executive Director, Doug Amar, and if our panelists could join us on the stage too, that would be great.
We have one. Is this the only other mic? Right. No, it's just the only other. I mean, the other. Are they on?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Amar, and I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Justice Project, and we're here to have a conversation about expungement/restriction. We have a great panel here, and I think it is a fluid morning for lots of reasons. I appreciate that it's flexible. So let me, here's my thought and a way to jump in. Why don't we just, if you would, really quickly, just so folks know who you are, if you would do a quick introduction. Is that all right? And John, you're at the end?
Sure. Hi, good morning. I'm John Helton. I'm the Executive Director of Atlantic Career Rise.
Good morning. My name is Sherry Boston, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the District Attorney for DeKalb County.
Good morning. First, my name is Marilyn Wynn. First of all, I'm formerly incarcerated, and I'm the Executive Director of Women on the Rise Georgia.
don't want to be in it. So, all right, so we're going to jump in here and try to mix up the conversation. So about, I guess I'm starting on this end, but tell me, ask, since Brenda had talked about this intersection with employment, and I'm going to talk about employment for a moment, John, would you talk about why, as running the group you run, and its connection to employment, and why you all are supportive, your organization is supportive of this legislative change and how it affects employment?
Sure, absolutely. So my organization is called Atlantic Career Rise, and we're what's referred to as a regional funder, collaborative, or intermediary. So what that really means in plain English is that we work with both job seekers and organizations specifically that serve job seekers and do workforce development. And we also work with companies that are really engaged in trying to create workforce pipelines or get new people into their workforce. And in addition to that, we work at the regional level from a systems perspective on trying to make things better when it comes to workforce development, increasing access, making sure the training is really relevant to what businesses need, that when people go through training programs that they actually have jobs at the end of those training programs. And just to overall improve the workforce development system. So why, Doug and I've known each other for a long time, and when we started having this conversation about second chance, it just makes good business sense, because as we speak to employers, specifically right now, when, economically we're doing really great, seemingly, in Georgia, and there's with some caveats, and we'll probably get into that in just a few minutes, but employers are really just dying. They really need people, and to not acknowledge the fact that they're excluding people based on really non-commonsensical reasons is depriving them of the workforce. So we really see this at Atlantic Career Rise as not only the right thing to do and a legal issue and a moral issue, but we also see it as a workforce development and an economic development issue, right? It just makes good sense for businesses and it makes good sense for our economy, both in Atlanta and for the state of Georgia, too.
So, Sherry, Sherry, I've known each other also a long time, so I apologize about his first name.
No, please do.
Okay, thank you. So, the most unusual person sitting on this panel would be you. Is someone who's an elected prosecutor whose job most people, your job is, a lot of people
to put people in jail.
That's right. Okay. Filling in that awkward blank. But obviously you've been involved in these issues. We work with your office very closely. But you obviously have a different approach, I think, in your office. But would you mind just commenting about why and how you come at this place of supporting these kinds of issues, whether individually or obviously from a legislative standpoint?
Well, I think for way too long, the role of the prosecutor has been viewed, rightfully so, by the community as kind of the law and order, lock them up. That my job is to just lock people up, throw away the key, and not care about people or families or communities in an effort to keep our community safe. And that has been the traditional philosophy of prosecutors. However, I believe that my philosophy as a prosecutor should be to how do I uplift and make my community overall safe. And that's not just about incarcerating people. That's also about understanding how we as a community living together, and obviously as an elected official, I live in the community that I prosecuted. So I have a vested interest in making sure that community is continued to be uplifted. We want our community to be relatively crime-free, but we also want the people that live in our community to be given opportunities and chances for rehabilitation. And in particular, our returning citizens who are coming back into our community, we want to make sure they have opportunities, whether that's in housing or career, or not having, a conviction that's always hanging over their head and their ability to move forward, to be a part of our community, because the only way that we can have returning citizens that can show that they want to be contributing members of society is if we accept them back as contributing members of society. And there have been extensive barriers for that in our community. And I think as a prosecutor, if I don't become a part of the solution, then that means I'm just standing as a barrier and as part of the problem. So that's our philosophy, and we understand that a lot of mistakes happen that are not, they may be crimes, they may be felonies. But they are oftentimes mistakes that people regret. And no one should be judged by the worst thing that they've ever done. You've got to be looked at like the whole self, the whole person, everything that you have to contribute and probably already have contributed to your community.
Thank you, that's great. Marilyn, we know each other a long time too.
Yes.
So you have quite a story. But I would love, there's many ways you can talk about your story and why you're here and all your great work with Women on the Rise. But I would love to sort of go back to this issue of employment for a moment, and I think it's a really consistent theme. Could you talk about your struggles, why you're here, and what you think this law will do to help people in similar situations as you?
Yes. So I want to go back. I want to go back to the day that I stood in court and just said I wasn't going back to jail again. I actually went to prison 6 times, and it was because I needed a job. From being arrested the first time caused me to not get a job the next time. And I ended up doing 6 prison sentences because I feel society pushed us in a space where we cannot move forward. And I just stood up and I said, I'm not going back this time. I need you to look at my record. And the DA was saying, well, yeah, look at your record. You need to go back again. And this would be my 7th time. I said, no, I want you to really sit down and look at it. So with that being said, I had this dialogue. And that dialogue meaning telling the judge, I've had 18 jobs. I actually had my Social Security statement to prove that I've had 18 jobs. But I was also terminated from 18 jobs because I lied to get those jobs. And so I got that opportunity there to talk about people like me. Do you actually think that we like going to jail? Do we like going to prison? No, we don't. But we don't have a choice. So I think this law as to restricting records and giving people the opportunity, and I don't say second chance, I say another chance. We don't know when a person needs that chance. And giving the person the opportunity to become whole, employed, and that is a human right to be employed. And so the work that I do is I started an organization called Women on the Rise. That organization is led by formerly incarcerated women of color. And we had the opportunity to change not one law, but we've changed 6 laws into leading the way now to close and repurpose the Atlanta City Jail into what we call a Wellness, Equity, and Freedom Center. I'm trying to put all this into one big breath. But yeah, so I think we are on the road to a new era, and people are beginning to see that jail is just not the problem, jail is just not the solution. And I think people that are impacted by the system are the ones that change the system. And I give kudos to you for being who you are and doing the work that you do, because without people like you, we wouldn't get anywhere. And so yeah, that's why this law is very important, because the first time you get a record, you actually got a life sentence. I don't care what it is. If you get fingerprinted and you get arrested, that's a life sentence. You can't hardly get a job or a decent job. You can't vote in some instances. You can't get housing. It's always what you can't do. But I beg to differ. If we stood up and fight for ourselves and go vote, do the things that organizations that are moving the justice system forward and eliminate some of those barriers, if we as individuals, formerly incarcerated individuals, take the time to support these organizations, then we can get a lot done.
The organ did start when she was speaking. Somebody was preaching. All right, John, let me go back to you. And I just want to ask you a couple questions about the idea that since 40 other states had the law, essentially the law we're talking about, how are Georgia workers disadvantaged by not having this ability?
So a number of ways, really, and not Georgia workers definitely, but also the HR people within companies that have the responsibility of screening and hiring people as well. From a competition standpoint, let's talk about economic mobility and the fact that poor workers stand in Georgia. And I'll go back to my opening statement about the fact that Georgia's doing really good, seemingly, from an economic development standpoint. We have news of new companies moving in all the time, right? But if you look at the wages of those jobs, there's some really weird things happening in Georgia that's created an economic mobility issue in our state. So the data shows, and consistently, Georgia ranks at the very bottom in terms of economic mobility for folks. And when you add scarlet letters to people's lives and these life sentences, Ms. Wynn, that you were talking about, that further handicaps people's ability to influence their own economic mobility. The data shows right now that if you start in the bottom quintile or the bottom 20% from an economic standpoint and for yourself and your family, there's only a 4% chance that you're going to be able to move yourself up to the top 20% in the Atlanta region. So you have a penalty against you at the very beginning of trying to improve the economic status of yourself and your family. When you add and complicate these things like the criminal background that is not relevant to the position, then certainly it handicaps your ability to do better. From an economic development standpoint, it's a very complicated system, and HR folks will be the first to tell you that there's a lot of contradictions in the way that they treat and handle expungements, the way that they assess criminal backgrounds for applicants, and to position Georgia at a disadvantage and at a handicap, it's an economic development issue from a competition standpoint as well.
Thank you, Chair, if I could ask you, so under the existing law, when we file a motion, what's called retroactive first offender, the one I call it the back door to get some of these records, kind of in a very small back door. Obviously, we're trying to create a front door, and the front door those cases will come to you, to prosecutors and the judges around the state. But I want to talk about how you all either now and anticipate this idea that the way the law is written now, and the way the law we're proposing would sort of require a balancing test as to whether or not restricting and expunging some of these records in light of a public interest to see of these records. And that's something I know you all struggle with and have some policies about. And I just wish you could talk about that, about what you're already doing and what you anticipate doing in the future, should this law pass.
So obviously, again, my role as a prosecutor is to look at public safety. And so when we talk about cases where we have motions filed by this agency and others or individuals, we have to look at the underlying facts of that particular case. And there are some circumstances where we believe we have a concern to public safety for a particular record, for us to oppose a record restriction under those circumstances. And some of those factors include, what's the nature of the crime? I will tell you in our office, when it comes to sex crimes, we are looking very closely at that because we understand that when we're talking about sexual assault or folks that may be working in our hospitals or children, we take those very seriously, and we have to make sure that we are not doing something that perhaps could allow for the community to be in danger. And that can be very difficult. We don't always agree on those facts and circumstances, but at the same time, I have to look at it with level eyes and make sure that I'm doing the best for the community. However, there's a great number of circumstances that we relatively can agree that folks have done their time, so to speak, whether it's incarceration or time on the outside under supervision. There have been a number of years, sometimes decades, since someone has committed any level of offense, and they have a history of showing that they are a truly productive member of society, and there's this thing out there that prevents them from moving forward oftentimes, or is a large hurdle to meaningful, gainful employment, or for people to view them within their companies as a member of society. So we try to look at all of those circumstances. I mean, there's a whole bunch more, from immigration to housing to the ability to get loans or go to school, that are also consequences that we look at every day and we know are burdens that formerly, or that folks that are carrying even misdemeanor convictions can face. And so that's why we're committed to making sure we look at every case.
Thank you. And so as we talk about this, Marilyn, I want to ask you about this role of sort of changing the narrative. We've heard a lot, part of the conversation that we believe you've got to talk about numbers and impact the community, you've got to talk about safety, which I appreciate you addressing, but we also have to change the narrative. And I know your organization is working hard to change the narrative of folks in these situations. So could you talk about what you all are doing to help change the narrative?
Yeah, we, as the young man that came up earlier and said, organize, educate, agitate, we do all of that. But we do it with people that have been impacted. We have to go out into the communities and talk about what we need, how we get there. People think, okay, well, they keep breaking in my car, they keep breaking in my car. That person needs services. They do not need jail. We need to keep educating communities about what people need and what will stop people. Like I said, I went to jail, I went to prison 6 times. I don't know how many times I've been arrested. Georgia Justice Project can probably tell you that. I don't know. I went so many that I don't know. I really, truly don't know. But what I do know is when I got the service I need, I never went again.
Yes.
And I spent 40 of my life, 40 years of my life in the system. My goal was to change the system because I didn't have to go to prison 6 times. I didn't have to spend 40 years of my life in the system. So my organization is an organization that educates, trains, and support formerly incarcerated women and put them into this work. Have them at the Capitol, have them at City Hall, to educate people about we are people. We are people that want another chance to do the right thing. I actually go into the Avondale State Prison every other Friday. Let me back up a little bit. I started out with this campaign work, not knowing anything about it. Reached out to Georgia Justice Project. I need to find out how to get this box off of applications because I don't want to go to prison again. I need a job. All I need to do is talk to an employer. So they led me in a direction where I was able to work and get the City of Atlanta to be the first organization to remove that box. So what I do now and with my other organizations, I go into the prison system every other Friday to teach employment development because people are coming out not knowing how to articulate backgrounds to an employer. They are not feeling confident enough to know that they're the expert at what they do. Employers need to hear that from us. I am the expert. I stayed in prison 5 years. I had a supervisor every day of that 5 years that I was in there. So I'm the expert in what I do. All I need is an opportunity, not for a job, but an opportunity to further my life and not have to repeat the system. So that's how we're changing the narrative, is having town halls. We have all kind of meetings, neighborhood planning meetings. We go there. We go to neighborhood associations. We are just spreading the words and trying to reach out to any policymaker that we can to let them know that we're people and we have human rights and we want to use those rights.
Thank you. I have a few more minutes. Is there 1 more minute? 2 more minutes? Okay. Let me sort of a wind down question. I know we have a couple of representatives who came in since we talked. Representative Stration is here, and Representative Sanders is here. Sorry, I didn't see. So but let me just finish up. So I just appreciate this focus on employment. And John, I wanted to give you one chance to talk about what your sense of the employer community, the business community, what your understanding is of how they will or won't, if that, maybe that's of how they're going to respond to this kind of effort, and what's your sense of the business community for this specific kind of legislation. What do you think they're going to do?
Now is the time to act, and I'm so glad that the momentum has picked up right now, where the economy is where it is, because going back to my original statement, if you look at the unemployment rate, we in Georgia are hovering in the low 3s, which basically means even when you factor in the other pieces of labor force participation and all that good stuff, basically we're full employment for all intents and purposes, except for the people who can't and the people that don't have the opportunity and that have been ostracized from the workforce development system. So there's a really interesting study that everybody's heard of the Society for Human Resources Managers, or SHRM. That's kind of like the preeminent professional association of HR people. They did a really good study about 2 years ago where they polled managers and HR professionals, 80% of the managers that were polled in that particular study said that they found the performance and the ability of folks that had a criminal background that they took the chance on equal to or greater than in terms of motivation than the people without the criminal background. And then 66% or 2/3 of the HR professionals had similar experiences. So, now is the time to strike with this particular messaging. And I think it's also, Ms. Wynn, changing the narrative, as you said, and putting a face on the folks and removing the stigma that's associated with. And that's a long process, but I think that this is the beginning of that. I think the employer community is very receptive to it right now because they need the labor force.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I just wanted to point out to our friends at GBPI just issued a report early this morning, about this very point, about the numbers in Georgia, particularly around unemployment for those of the record, which is 6-7 times more than the 15%. Folks of the record in Georgia, 15% unemployment compared to 3% in the entire state. Exactly. So I know we're going to be pushing that report out. Great job. So, Sherry, for you, I want to ask, the theme of this last question is really the changing winds, and what are the winds? Winds, W-I-N-D-S, not So, the changing winds. So, around the state, and we heard, Senator Jones earlier talk about this a little bit, that prosecutors seem to be changing. There's this movement, not just in the state, but around the country. It seems to be that there's this movement of what some are calling progressive prosecutors, or some are just calling, maybe it's just restorative prosecutors. Could you just speak to sort of, I'm asking for a note of hopefulness, you can get a sense. But a sense that, my sense is that things are changing. And could you just speak to that so you can encourage us here a little bit?
I will say this. I think nationally there are a handful of prosecutors that are interested in fair and just outcomes. I am hopeful that we can continue that narrative across the country and in particularly here in Georgia. Right now, I don't think there are enough of us having these conversations, sitting as elected chief prosecutors. I'm not going to disparage any of my colleagues. I just don't think that right now there are enough of us in the room. And I'd like to see more, because if we are concerned with the future of our communities, we have to be talking about these issues. If we're concerned with justice, then we have to be concerned with fair and just outcomes, which also include the implications and ramifications and collateral consequences of convictions. I would like to see more on our federal level. Unfortunately, there are many prosecutors like myself that are speaking out on these issues are not always supported by our law enforcement agencies at the highest level. We've heard disparaging comments come directly from our Attorney General claiming that prosecutors like myself are making our communities less safe by not seeking the highest outcomes or participating in criminal justice reforms. And frankly, the data just does not support that at all. It is a fallacy. What the data does support is when we can concentrate our efforts on our most violent offenders in our community, meaning the people that I know tomorrow will go out and murder someone. That's where my resources should be. Putting large amounts of resources to incarcerate or saddle people with convictions for nonviolent felonies or low-level felonies is not a good use of my time. Which is why we support accountability courts, which is why I support diversion programs in my office, where we take felonies, people that have legitimately committed a felony, and we divert them out of the criminal justice system because we believe we give them access to education, counseling, career readiness, and all of these opportunities. That's the only thing they need to avoid being in the criminal justice system. And what I say is, for my community, the community that I live and work in, that I'm raising my children in, I would rather be in a community that's focused on rehabilitating the people in my community rather than putting them back in prison where perhaps, and most likely, they are not coming out with the resources that they need to better themselves. So as a prosecutor, I will continue to do that because I know it keeps rates of recidivism down. You heard, particularly right here from Ms. Wynn, she never went back to jail once she got the resources that she needed to address the issue that was happening in her life that made her underemployed. And if we aren't looking at everyone in our system in that way, then we are doing the folks in our community a great disservice.
Thank you. So last question, and continuing the win theme with the W-Y-N-N. I-N-N, it's always. Too many wins. So Marilyn, if you wouldn't mind, there's a lot of folks in the audience who've been where you've been, or in places where you have moved on from. Amazing. What advice and suggestions, what encouragement you give to folks in the audience about how they should deal with the struggle that you've so successfully overcome?
My advice would be to find an organization that's doing whatever it is that you need. You get in that organization, and if you got to volunteer, you volunteer, because when you was in prison, you worked, you didn't get paid. A lot of people, we come back and we say, oh, I don't want to do that because I want some money. But trust me, it pays off in the long run. Join an organization that is doing the work, that supports whatever it is that you need. And stand up for yourself. Speak out. Don't sit back. I sit back many years because I committed a crime. I said, well, I did it, I'm going to jail. But it hit me one day. I'm not going to jail because I want to go. I'm going to jail because society is sending me to jail. They're not letting me do what I need to do to support myself and use my human rights. But that is my suggestion for people. Find an organization that is doing the work. Join that organization or volunteer with it. Do whatever you want to do with it, but stick with it.
Thank you, Marilyn. If you all give them a great round of applause. So, I've got 3 mics now. This is great. Thank you, Chuck. If you would mind, Chairman Administration, Chuck Administration is here, and he is the chair of the House Judiciary and Non-Civil Committee, with whom we have had numerous conversations about this issue, and I'm so honored for you to be here. If you would mind saying whatever you'd like to say about this issue to this lovely crowd.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you all here today. The dedication of the Nathan Deal Judicial Building is happening across the street right now, and I just walked over through the rain. My friend just sent me a text. There was a seat with my name on it there. So you all are my witnesses where I am right now, and I wanted to be with you all here today. What if the biggest mistake of your life was attached to every job application, every housing application, and was used to judge your character? One mistake that follows you for the rest of your life. Now, does that seem fair? Is that the right thing to do? Should we be preventing people from finding employment, from finding stable housing based upon that alone? No. Right? These concepts are central to criminal justice reform, which was begun by Governor Nathan Deal when he was governor of Georgia. And I had the honor of serving on the Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform. And I carried many of the changes to Georgia law, which now have made Georgia a model nationally for implementing criminal justice reform in an effective manner. Records restriction, or what's also called expungement, is another critical block of that. So just to tell you a little bit about my background, I currently represent a state house district in Gwinnett County, Decula and Lawrenceville, so northeastern suburbs. I started my career as an assistant district attorney, working as a prosecutor. And after I left that job, I worked as a defense attorney, criminal defense attorney. I've seen both sides of the criminal justice system, and I've also seen how judges implement criminal justice in different circuits in the state of Georgia. And the impressions that I have are this: the opportunity to ensure that individuals who have been charged with criminal offenses are able to satisfy any debt to society pronounced in a sentence, but then go on to live their lives to be productive members of society, is something that not only is wonderful and is something that we can all commend, but it's something that the state of Georgia should appreciate and support. And I really appreciated District Attorney Boston's comments. I really enjoyed listening to the panel, what I heard when I arrived. But Sherry Boston is prosecuting offenses based upon what the state of Georgia has on the law books, right? And so really the leadership needs to come from the General Assembly. We need to be able We have an incredible opportunity now to pass a meaningful records restriction bill that follows in the efforts of criminal justice reform over the past few years. And that includes a means by which a person who has a conviction on his or her record is able to, after the passage of time, allow for that record to be restricted. And the exact procedure for that to be done is really something that we're discussing. The policy behind it is not in debate, at least to my knowledge. Right? I chair a committee that deals with changes to the criminal justice law in Georgia. And so I look forward to reviewing any proposed legislation that's in this area, and I know that the members of my committee, on a bipartisan basis, Republicans and Democrats, want to see that this is addressed. It's just a question of exactly how the mechanics will work to get there. But I'm convinced, consistent with what we've seen in many other states, Georgia will be able to get this done. And this will be able to, this will be done in a way that preserves public safety, which is always the cornerstone of criminal justice reform, but allows individuals to not be marked and followed for the rest of their lives by one bad mistake. So I'm really honored to be with you here today. I want to thank you for your time, for your advocacy. I think that the folder that I was handed to review you've all received is really excellent. The information in there is very, very helpful. And I would encourage you to continue to push for meaningful records restriction laws in Georgia. Together, we can all get this done. Thank you so much.
I'll ask, again, thank you for being here, Chairman of the Station, and all your great work. Well, I'm asking Dominique Madison to come up. I want to just also acknowledge Representative Bruce, who came, and I think he's here somewhere. He can step out on the side there. He's talking about DA Boston, but I just want to acknowledge his involvement. So with that, Dominique, my coworker and friend of many years, is here to take us to the next level. Thank you.
Good morning, Tim. Good morning. Good morning. I have the pleasure of introducing someone that we've been working with for some time. When I think about advocacy and directly impacting advocacy, she's the perfect model of this. She's that person who does advocacy that most of us in bigger organizations see her. That, oh, I'll go to the train station and I'll meet people where they are. Or I'll go, if I need to knock on doors, I'll knock on doors. You know, to get this information out to people. This person I'm speaking of is Ms. Sharon Turner. Ms. Turner, she's an entrepreneur. She's a directly impacted individual. She's an organizer. She's a street activist. She'll be wherever you need her to be to make sure that she's reaching the people that need to hear the information. She's going to spend a few minutes sharing her story about the impacts of having a criminal history. So give it up one more time for Ms. Turner.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. Good morning. I'm glad to be here and to kind of share some of my lived experience as a impacted person by the criminal justice system. I have been to jail like 6 times, had a drug addiction for 20 years. The last 10 years were like crack cocaine. I went to rehabilitation one time before I ended up incarcerated in the penal system in Georgia prison. I was wrongfully convicted for that particular crime. 2 counts of Controlled Substance Act, and they said that I sold cocaine quantities to an undercover narcotic agent, which was not the truth. My sister, my youngest sister, was a drug dealer, and she was the person that they knew that committed the crime, and they were investigating. So they actually incarcerated me along with her, knowing that they didn't even know who I was, that she even had a sister. And in 1993, this was part of the war on drugs time, you know, kind of always kind of midway done with that. But I ended up getting a sentence of 15 years to serve 10 in the Georgia prisons here. Upon my release, I went to therapy because I became angry towards authority figures. Knowing I had to come home and live with my mother, she's the authority figure in her home. I would have a parole and probation officer. I did 2 years inside the prison system and had 8 years on paper. So I put myself in therapy to learn how to respond versus react. So that helped me a lot. From that point forward, moving forward, I've been out of prison 25 years. I got nothing on my record since. I did training through Goodwill Industries and got into the construction industry. I had an 18-year career in building trades, and also I became an entrepreneur 2 years after I got out of prison and learned some things in the construction industry. And I had a home improvement business for 8 years successfully, and I employed people like myself and those that needed opportunities that had never been to prison. So 2 years ago, I applied for some housing. I am 64 years old, so I'm in that senior category, and the housing was for subsidized housing in Midtown. I worked and lived on that site as a maintenance person for 15 months, paid rent when it was under the Atlanta Housing Authority. I got denied housing because of my background. They didn't want to say, they said it wasn't my credit, so I said, what is it then? I already knew what it was, so I had to get them to come around and admit they denied me due to my felony convictions. So Georgia Justice Project, I went to them, they stood up for me to advocate to get me an informal hearing along with the Atlanta Legal Aid. So I had an opportunity to share my story with their corporate hearing officer and their attorney. The corporate hearing officer said they had a band. This is the new private company that the Atlanta Housing Authority sold the property to, and is selling the other properties where the seniors live now that is still under public housing. So she decided after hearing my story that she would ask that they make a decision to waive the ban on my behalf. Well, we did what they asked. We submitted all kinds of recommendations, references, my background where I had completed all kinds of training and been out in the community doing good work. I got denied again. Can you hear me? The mic went out. Can you hear me? Okay. So I got denied again without any kind of explanation. The time frame had passed for us to get the things we needed to get to them. Once I did that, we didn't hear from them for a few weeks. So what I decided to do and realized this was bigger than me. So now I am building up and mobilizing and agitating on behalf of justice-involved people like myself. And we have a survey that I created along with Dominique to go out in the streets and find the people that are living homeless or been impacted or their families been impacted because they have been arrested or convicted of felony convictions. And with this, my goal is to change the laws here, starting with the city of Atlanta and then across the state of Georgia. Because this does impact people. It impacts the families. You know, when we come home, sometimes we can't live with our families because of the records. They can get evicted. Sometimes home is not the best place for us to go because of the environment. So we end up on the street. You can get a job sometime. And if we have a job, you still can't get housing. So you're living on the street. So I think, you know, being that housing is one of the biggest collateral consequences of being incarcerated. And we have to change that. The other thing we're doing with Restore Us, that's one of my colleagues, Pamela Wynn, this is her organization. We received a grant to inform formerly incarcerated people to participate in this census and why it's important that they do. Even though you may not can vote, you still can participate and have a voice in this census. It only comes every 10 years. And it's important because $20,000 is per person that's counted, goes into funding for issues that impact us in our communities and families. So with that said, I hope everyone participate and fill out this form, whether you're impacted directly or indirectly. This will help us collect data, because someone told me there's never been data done, and this is from advocates across the country that got the laws changed in Chicago and other places in California and New York, that there has never been any data collected on how the impact of not being able to get housing because of your record affects everybody in the community. So thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.
At this time, we're going to spend a few minutes allowing individuals in the audience, if you have a story or you have something you would like to share. Yes, sir. To spend a few minutes talking about your stories and the impact of having them here.
Good morning, everyone. I'll try not to be long.
Wait, before you get started, I'm so sorry. I do want to remind everyone that this is being recorded live. So if you do not feel comfortable sharing your story live, we have a video. We have a room in the back. We are taking stories. Feel free to just see me at the end to record your story.
My name is Punch Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of Uplifting People. It's an organization which helps returning citizens that are transitioning back into our communities. In June of 2001, I was sentenced to 30 to serve 15 years for drug trafficking. Of course, we are not at 2031. I can say that I'm glad to see all of you here because this is a start, but we have a long way to go. Reentry is a big topic right now. You have a lot of people talking about it. There's a lot of money out there for it. But unfortunately, I can tell you that we're not getting to the crux of the matter. For those who really want to make an impact on reentry, for the lawmakers, the legislatures, for the business owners, for anyone who can make a decision in the corporation that they're currently working in, you want to make an impact on reentry? Have someone that has been affected by the criminal justice system, i.e. a returning citizen, come to work at your business. We talk about jobs for returning citizens. I don't agree with that. The acronym I use for jobs is just over broke. Let's talk about careers for returning citizens. If we want the private industry to give returning citizens an opportunity, how about the state, the city, the county? How about they give them those same opportunities to work for the city, the state, and the county? Lead by example. Let's give these individuals the jobs or careers doing the same things that they're doing in prison 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day, and are only being paid a peanut butter sandwich and a meat sandwich. I can tell you I've been terminated from 3 jobs where I've moved all the way up to general manager. And the reason I was terminated was because I intimidated those that were competing with me for my positions because I worked harder than the average individual. They couldn't understand my drive. I can tell you, prison didn't change me. Prison is criminal college. You learn how to be a better criminal in prison. What changed me was that woman that came to visit me every weekend, Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, that is now my wife. Wow. What changed me is that 6 years, 1 month, and 11 days that I spent away from my child. That move that I made that day to get that drug trafficking charge was really about him. That's what changed me. And I can tell you, the criminal justice system that we currently have it doesn't make it easy for your family to come visit you. They send you all over the state. It doesn't make it easy for your family to support you because they charge astronomical amounts for you to have a phone call to talk to your family. They make it hard for your family to come and visit you. You got to get a special visit request. If they want to change this system, they need to have the formerly incarcerated in on these congressional meetings and Senate meetings and in on these conversations about criminal justice reform. We're the ones that can reform it, not the people who haven't been through it, because those that haven't been through it, they put on a show for them when they come to the prisons. That's right. They paint it to look good. They clean it up. They put the people in the positions to say the things that they want them to say when they're coming through it. If we reduce the recidivism rate, then we also reduce the amount of jobs that are needed in the prisons. Why would they want that? They have a guaranteed job with a guaranteed population. We have a private prison industry here that gets paid. CCA, criminal, I call it criminal, but you know what I mean. Corrections Corporation of America. I did time at every type of prison here because it's the modern day slave trade. The only type of prison I haven't been to here was the federal system. And I can tell you that I'm no longer on probation or parole. As I said, I had a 30, 15. I'm fully restored. I have all my rights, and I can tell you this year, I voted. I'm a volunteer. I go into all the prisons. This is my volunteer credentials. I ask anybody who's in the faith industries, if you don't have a program going into the prisons, get with me, let's talk. Because we need to go in and minister to these kids. I've been asked to be a mentor in juvenile justice. I'm gonna do it. I also have been into the federal system. One thing that I noticed when I volunteered to go into the prisons, after everybody would speak, everybody came and spoke to me afterwards. Everybody on the prison ministry would ask, why does everybody come and talk to you? I said, because they can tell with the words that's coming out of my mouth, I've been where they at. Right. So if I tell them they can be successful, they come to me to see how I can be in touch with them. Because I can tell you that I help people to get employment coming out of prison. And when I'm doing that, how I do it is I speak to the people who are in decision-making positions and I tell them the benefits of hiring returning citizens. Someone who's going to come and work hard and give them everything they got. And by the time I'm done with that conversation, they're giving me their name and their number and they're asking me to contact them with people. But if we want to change the system, we need to put education back into the system. Yeah, you can take the box off the application, but when that person fills out that resume, they're going to have a gap in years. How can they account for that? So let's talk about helping these individuals get an education and putting them in careers. And as we put them in careers, reuniting them with their family and having individuals establishing their visiting rights with their children, putting themselves on child support, because that's what I talk about to them.
Thank you.
We can change it.
All right, we want to make sure that we have the opportunity for a lot of people to share their stories, or if you don't want to share, again, we will have space in the back for you to do so. But at this time, is there anyone else interested in sharing their stories?
Good morning, everyone. Morning, excuse me. My name is Michael Taylor. I'm a 2014 graduate of Morehouse College. And once I graduated from Morehouse, I took a trip back to Arkansas. And we have this saying, you go to Arkansas on vacation and you leave on probation. But clearly this kind of sentiment throughout the South. But unfortunately, I was arrested and I received a felony conviction. I had 0.02 milligrams of a hydrocodone pill found in my possession. Received it from my sister, where there was no malice, no ill intent. Just didn't take the pill. The officer found it in my pocket. At the time, I didn't understand why I was going through what I was going through. But I think it was for me to get some kind of exposure on the other side of the criminal justice system. I thought I was the exception to the rule. Knew how to dress, knew how to wear the suit, graduated with honors, did everything that I graduated, no kids out of wedlock. Everything my grandmother told me to do, I found myself doing. But still found myself making that mistake that fortunately a lot of people don't escape, because we've all been there. A lot of times we just may have not been found guilty or whatever, but we've all one mistake away from being on the other side. And I think that's why I went through what I went through, for me to get that exposure, because after experiencing that, I started to work in reentry, and I found a passion for helping the least of these. And in doing so, I was fortunate enough to work for an organization by the name of Job Rise, in which we help formerly incarcerated individuals with employment. And I'm also here with the CEO of another organization that I work with out in Sandy Springs by the name of Every Woman Works, in which we use employment as a stabilizer to help women move towards self-sufficiency. But with that being said, I always like to be a resource. So I know a lot of you work with a lot of people in the criminal justice system. I'm a recruiter, and I solely work with individuals who have criminal records. And I'll leave my information with Doug. But I'm actually looking to hire some ex-offenders. The job that I have is super background friendly. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is because I feel like it's a life-changing opportunity. The salary is $35,000 to $40,000 a year. And it's a 100% travel. I'm telling you all of these things before I tell you the job, because I feel like those are the more important pieces to it. It being travel, 100%, but it's a beverage machine installer and repair. So if you like soft drinks, we need someone who goes into stores and do that type of work. So if you all know somebody, I would definitely want to interview them or at least talk to them. Of course, you know we can't hire every single person, but I do want to be seen in rooms like this as somebody who wants to help. So with that being said, I'm going to leave my information with Doug, but we're looking to hire 6 people for the machine installer and repair position. They just need to be able to travel and open to traveling 100% of the time. But outside of that, I think it's a life-changing opportunity, and we will give them enough money to where they can make a livable wage.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Carruthers, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And I want to thank you guys for every good thing that you've done, all the good work you're doing. I'm proud of that good work. To make a long story short, I was born in some very unfortunate circumstances, raised in an orphanage, raised by wolves, went down the wrong path, stayed on that path for 50 years. I have an extensive criminal history spanning 4 decades. It wasn't my choice, but those were my choices. It's my reality. Bullet holes have healed. Prisons I was in were condemned because they were whatever, behind the wall. Bullet holes, they put plaster over them. My name is Bill Carruthers. I'm a person in long-term recovery. Today I'm a certified psychiatric rehabilitation practitioner. Today I'm a CARES. Today I'm a CPS for addictive disease, whole health, mental health. Today I'm a forensic peer specialist. Today I'm the CEO of Recovery on Fire. Today I'm living the dream. Are you with me? If you're with me, clap your hands. I've had an opportunity to travel all across the United States, partnering with CIT, partnering with NAMI. I'm on the board of directors for NAMI. I've had a chance to share this messaging, and people tell me, man, that's an incredible story. We don't get the story without the record, right? Had an opportunity to speak, right? I'm telling you this not because I want you to think I'm somebody, but I'm telling you this because every time they run my criminal history, it comes back with new stuff, right? That wasn't even on the last one, right? I'm telling you this because my criminal history spans 4 decades. And people ask me, what were you doing then? I can't even remember that, right? When I walked into a place to get a job and the lady said, let me see your resume, I said, I don't have a resume. She said, everybody should have a resume. Well, I never worked. I was an armed robber. So she said, well, I'm sure you have one job. I said, well, I did have one job, but I didn't want to put it on there because I went to prison from the job. And that was my reality, right? I still got the job. That was before the waiver. There's a lot of good stuff happening, but there's a lot of good stuff that has to happen. Today, I'm also the project developer for Stepping Up initiative in Rockdale County, which is about reducing the number of people that are in jails with mental health and substance use challenges. So all I can say is it's a privilege for me to be here today. Like I said, I've been to the White House, but I can't get my house. I get denied because I'm trying to get an apartment, and they say you're not. What I'm saying is, when is the debt paid? What I'm saying is, when is the debt paid? And how do I pay it? Because in the last 12 years, I've done everything imaginable to change my life. I partner with people, we build programs, we do everything. We're giving it away. I'm leaving it on the floor. I'm just asking, how do I pay that debt? How do I pay that debt? I guess it's by partnering with the Georgia Justice and partnering with all these other systems and thanking you for every good thing you do, every good thing you ever did. Even if you did it by accident, I'm going to thank you for it anyway. Thanks for your time.
That would like to share a story today?
Don't make me feel like I need to say something. So I'm Jeff Breedlove, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I'm also a person who's currently on probation. And I wanted to say something on behalf of the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse because we are so excited to be here with Georgia Justice. Everybody needs a second chance, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. Underlying everything that's been said today is a disease, substance use disorder. It's at the core of everything we're talking about. It's a disease, it's not a crime, and it's time for Georgia, the counties in Georgia, the cities in Georgia, and frankly our federal partners in Washington to stop criminalizing people with the disease. And we feel very, very, that's right, you can applaud for that. And to have a bipartisan representation of our General Assembly here today, and to have Senator Harold Jones talking about a transformational piece of legislation is extraordinary. And to have a chairman of a committee leave a dedication, walk in the rain, to come stand in front of a group of citizens, that's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And when he left, I don't even think he had an umbrella, for what it's worth. And so I just want to say that the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse is proud to support this effort. We look forward to being of service to anybody at any time. We are all over social media. It is almost impossible not to find us. We hope you'll follow us. We hope you'll let us be of service. And I'll leave you with one legislative update. There has been a new entity formed at the General Assembly this year. It's an official working group sponsored by the House and the Senate. It's bipartisan and bicameral in the House and the Senate, and it's called the General Assembly Working Group on Addiction and Recovery. In the House, the chairman is State Representative Eric Allen. He's a Democrat from Cobb County. And in the Senate, it's Senator Randy Robertson, who's a Republican senator. And I strongly encourage you to talk to your local state representative and state senator. I talked to Senator Jones this morning, who joined this morning, to get your member to join the working group on addiction and recovery so that they can bring forth legislation that will help everything we're talking about here. So thanks for letting me share.
We will have one final story. And again, if you haven't had the opportunity to share a story, we will be in that back room, so just come and see us, and we will definitely take account of your story.
Hey everybody, my name is Angie Hubert. I wanted to come up here and speak to free myself, so I'm doing this for myself, and I'm also doing this to encourage others. First time I was arrested, I was 17 years old. I actually grew up an orphan here, similar to a brother that said that he was in an orphanage. I grew up an orphan here, and I ran away from a group home, and they arrested me. And so the group home didn't want me back, so they put me in jail. Crazy story is the jail was going to let me out on the OR bond until they realized I was a foster child, and they just couldn't throw me out on the street. Still to this day, that is on my background check. I just want to leave words of encouragement that no matter what you want, no matter what you want to do with your life, I'm an educator. And anytime I apply for a position at a school, I always tell them my story first. It's always nerve-wracking. The background check is very nerve-wracking. Unfortunately, right out of foster care when I was 18 years old, I was trafficked. And it's on my background record as prostitution, but I was trafficked, but it's still, this is Georgia, this is what happens. And I pled no contest, but it's still on my background check, and I filed for an expungement, I got denied. But that didn't stop me from applying to schools, and it didn't stop me from wanting to be an educator and wanting to give back to the community, because working with kids is so fulfilling for me. So if there's something you want to do, tell your story. If you really want that job, talk to the people, talk to the director, tell your story, because a lot of times you'd be surprised. People have a heart, and quite honestly, if you've been through something, then that actually says a lot about your character when you have a story. So just stay encouraged and apply for that job that you think you're not going to get, and talk to those people in that front office. Tell them your story, and you'll be surprised how there actually are really good people out there. Thank you.
All right, thank you to everyone who spoke, and now we're going to move to action, right? That's why we're here, not just to talk about it, but to do something about it. And I feel good that we have a lot of legislative support, but there's a lot more legislators over there that don't know about this issue yet, so we're going to hear from Maisie Lynn Causey from the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, who is a lobbyist at the Capitol, who will give us some tips and some instructions, and then we will leave here and go across the street to Legislative Office Building or the Capitol to speak with our legislators. Yeah, that's what I was going to put there. I think that was his.
Good morning. How are you?
Just make sure.
I tell you, it's hard to come behind that kind of energy and then get into the nuts. Oh, you can't? Sorry. Can you hear me if I do that?
Hold it right up.
Is that any better? Okay, so I'll try to stay close. So it's hard to come behind that kind of energy only to walk you through papers, but I do want to do that so that you guys can get a feel for what has been included in this great packet that the Georgia Justice Project has put together for all of us. So if you'll pull out your folder, a lot of the lobbying tips I'm going to discuss are here. And I think I want to start by saying what we've heard here today is all you need to take with you across the street to talk to your representatives and the representatives making these decisions on our behalf. There's no magic language. There's nothing particular you need to have prepared. You need to talk about your experience and the experience of your neighbors and friends and the people that you care about, and how the legislation that's moving through impacts them. So let's get started with this page here. This is the information on how to find your legislators if you don't already know. Now, if you'll take a look at your name tag, GJP put in some serious elbow grease to get your legislators and elected officials' names, a few of them, onto your name tag. On the front, you'll have listed your elected district attorney as well as your elected solicitor general. And on the reverse, you'll have your House representative and your state senator. Now, if you registered using like your office address, that these are not going to be accurate. You're going to want the representatives and the elected officials that tie to your home address. So we're going to have some computers set up over at the main table if you need to look those up. But otherwise, you should be able to rely on your name tag. And there apparently were also a few other glitches. So if you know with any certainty that you don't have the right names, you'll want to stop by the computer and get that checked out. For today, the most important folks are the ones that are on the back. Also included with their names is the location of their office. So for instance, my representatives are Senator Nan Orrock, and she sits in the state capitol building in 420B. So just like any office building, her suite 420 is going to be on the 4th floor of the Capitol. My state representative, David Dreyer, sits across the street in what's called the Coverdale Legislative Office Building, and that's abbreviated as CLOB. And the Coverdale Legislative Office Building is across Mitchell Street. It's pretty well marked, and all of the offices there also kind of run floor by floor. He happens to be on the 6th floor. If you live in my district, you'll find him in 604. That's the first place to start, is where are you headed today? The next thing to consider is some of the tips that they've provided around who and what to bring to them. Now, I'm not going to read through all these tips. I know that you all can do that, but I do want to highlight a few of them for you. One of them is to walk a mile in your legislator's shoes. Now, this means just do some background work. Figure out if there are any connections you might have or similarities you might have to these folks. For instance, earlier today, I don't know if you all heard from Greg Kennard, but he was here. He is a House representative from the Gwinnett area. Some interesting things about him, he's a father of 3, so maybe you might connect with him on being a parent. He is born and raised in the Atlanta and Gwinnett area. Maybe you're also a native, there aren't that many of you, so always take advantage of being a native and making that kind of connection. He is a Bible college graduate, and maybe you are too. He runs a nonprofit called Inspire that services homeless individuals and those impacted by domestic violence. I found out all of this information about Representative Kennard from his biography on the legislative website. Each of the legislators on the main General Assembly website have their own webpage with usually they have a biography link. You can click there, and of course once you learn a little bit there, you may go to their own personal, they might have a campaign website that has even more information. But you might just find some nugget of connection that when you bring it to them will help them maybe remember you or might make your story stand out from the others that they're hearing. Representative Kennard is a Democrat. You also heard today from Republican Chuck Efstration. Chairman Efstration is who came over from the Judicial Building dedication, and like Representative Kennard, Efstration was also born and raised in Gwinnett County. He is a big UGA fan, which as a Yellow Jacket, I am not, but maybe you are. And you might be able to make that connection with him, or maybe he'll remember me because I'm his rival, right? You never know what piece of non-legislative information is going to make you stand out, and it's worth spending a little bit of time, doesn't take much, 5 minutes, to do that little bit of research. We've all got, most of us have phones where we can do that, so you can do it even on the fly today if you would like. And also, the information about how to find those websites is on the back of your tips page. I tell you, DJP has got you covered from start to finish on being a citizen lobbyist. This is, I hope that you will keep this folder and refer to it a lot. They've really given you a lot of great, helpful tools. I want to also highlight the idea that, follow the golden rule. Someone here earlier was mentioning some of the rules that his grandma taught him. And I think a lot of grandmas have taught us to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and just to be kind. We are going to disagree often in this space, but we can do it with calm, we can do it with confidence. When they go low, we go high, all the things, right, that we can do. But one of the things I would like to suggest that I have found in my practice to be a really helpful tool is to write a handwritten thank you note and send it in an envelope with a stamp to their office. They get inundated with emails. They get inundated with phone calls. But a handwritten note, I think, is a rarity, and I've had folks over there mention that to me when I have followed up a conversation with a handwritten note. They know that that takes a lot of extra time and effort, and they appreciate it very much. So that's something else you can do kind of in this follow the golden rule concept. So the next piece of paper I would like for you to pull out and find is this talking points. This is a two-sided sheet also. The front talks about the talking points around record restriction or expungement, and the back gives you some talking points for expanding voting rights. Now, like I started with, there's nothing here that's magic language, but these are some really salient points that can help you stay on message. Because one thing that was also mentioned earlier is this idea that we have got to organize. And when we can organize around some common talking points, that repetition is going to make a difference. So if you can weave some of these talking points into your conversation or into any email communications you might send, that's going to go a long way to carry this message forward for us as in a collaborative way. But don't feel like if you haven't memorized these, you shouldn't go across the street and talk. You should. You don't have to put these, memorize these or take them to heart in that way. Just, it might pop into your mind after you've reviewed it a couple times once you're across the street talking. And I'm going to move on to that now, to moving across the street. So you may be aware that this is not a typical week for our General Assembly. They are not holding typical legislative session days. So where at this point in the day we might typically go across the street and call them out to the ropes that stand outside of their chambers, that's not available to us today because that's not where they're convening. They are in the midst of some budget hearings because the one constitutional duty that they have to do within their 40 days is to pass a balanced budget. And right now they're pretty far from doing that. So they've taken about a 10-day break in order to spend some more time on that. It is my understanding that a lot of them are still here. Many of them are in the budget hearings, and some who are not on those committees are just staying around to see how that is playing out and to have some influence on those decisions. So you will still be able to get messages to them, and you're going to use the same documents that you would use to call them out to the ropes. If you want to come back next week and do this action at the ropes, come back. They will be in session again starting on the 18th, Tuesday morning the 18th. And the way that you call them to the ropes is you take the message form, either for the Senate or the House, and you just fill it out as best you can, as completely as you can, with your name and phone number, who you represent, if you represent a particular organization or agency, or certainly even just yourself, and then give them some idea of what you'd like to speak with them about. It walks you right through. For today, our recommendation is you go ahead and fill these out and take them to your representative's office. Again, that's on your name tag. And leave it for them if they happen to not be there. And let me also just say that those rules of kindness and grace go a long, long way with the men and women who support these legislators in their offices. If you've ever worked in customer service, you know the breadth of attitudes that you encounter, and these men and women are no different. So if you can bring a breath of fresh air to their office, they will certainly appreciate that. Bring them a donut. That's right. Ann says there are extra donuts. If you would like to take them a donut, that is perfectly fine. We would love to see them go to be well used. And what you can do, these already have cards attached. If you'd like to leave those attached, that does give them some information about our issues. You also have this beautiful 2-page 4-color flyer that speaks to our issues, and facts are always going to move folks. These have some amazing facts and points of interest on them, so also can inform your conversations, but also a nice leave behind to leave with your message. Okay. When I first started practicing law and I went to the courthouse for one of the first times, I remember thinking how the folks sitting in the pews must feel so overwhelmed, because I sure did. I was a brand new lawyer. I didn't always know what people were saying or what they meant. They were talking in what felt like code to me. And I just would think of families that were there for the first time with their loved ones facing prosecution and seeing all this happening in front of them. And there's no one there really to tell you what's going on. The more I got into my practice, the more that became my water, right? That was just what I lived in, worked in every day. It was the air I breathed. It became so secondhand. And that's where I am now in lobbying, right? Like this stuff I'm telling you, this is my everyday. And I realize I've gone through it very quickly. And so I would love to take just a couple minutes. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll stay around for a few minutes afterward too, if you'd rather just come and talk to me directly. I don't want to be overwhelming. At the same time, I'm aware of the time, and I know that you'd love to get across the street and say your hellos if they're available and get some lunch at some point. So any quick questions that I might answer? Yes, ma'am.
So you said it's when I wanted to go next Tuesday when they back in session.
What time?
Okay, she's asking if you wanted to come on a legislative day, like for instance Tuesday the 18th when the chambers are going to be back in session, what time do you come? They tend to convene each day at 10 a.m. There is an occasional variance to that 10 a.m. time. You can find it on their website. Usually if you go to legis.ga.gov, which is also listed on one of these documents, the back of the tip sheet has the website, what's happening at the Georgia General Assembly. Usually on that very front page they will tell you what time they're convening. They usually start at about 10 o'clock and they typically close the doors for about the first half hour. That's when they hear from the doctor of the day and the chaplain of the day. There are just some proceedings that they do where they don't want to be interrupted. But as soon as they open those doors, what will happen is you'll turn your card in. It happens to be all women who staff these reception areas. One of the women staffing that area will take your card. They will give it to a young person who's there acting as a page. The page will then take your card into the chamber and find the representative and hand it to them, and they will either come back to you, the page will come back to you and say, they're going to come out and meet you, I'll help you find them, or they're not going to come out to meet you, here's what they said. The page is responsible for being your liaison with the representative once you have asked to meet with them by using your message document. Yes?
Is there any way to find out if our representatives are currently in the budget hearings or if they're going to be in their office today?
I would say the best way to figure that out is through the website. So the folks that are involved in the appropriations hearings, I'm sorry, let me repeat her question in case you didn't hear it. She's wondering if there's a way to know if your representative is going to be in one of these appropriation budget hearings or if they'll be in their office. If they're in the hearings, it's because they're on the appropriation committee that's convening today, which would require you to, if you go to your representative's page, it'll list for you which committees they are a member of, and if you see an appropriations committee link, you can follow that through to see if they're meeting. It is by far not the majority. With respect to the House especially, the size of the House is so large relative to the sizes of these committees. Most of the House members are not going to be in hearings today, but it also doesn't mean they're necessarily present. So I'd say the best thing you can do is just go to their office, because probably the support staff will know as well where they are and whether you might be able to run into them coming back from the hearings. Maybe one more and then we'll call it a day. Any more? Okay, thanks so much. We really appreciate you coming down. Oh, I forgot about this. Sorry.
Yeah. So one other thing to note is that you need an ID to get into the Capitol. If you don't have an ID, they said that they can look you up, but when they look you up, they run your background check. So, just know that, right? So we can make phone calls here, you can send emails from here, you can go across the street, leave that note that's up there, which is attached to a postcard that's designed to leave behind. And so is, we have extra handouts over there that you can take if you're a legislator you think would need some data and some facts, you can take extra handouts. So, before we leave, I would like to invite up Reverend Dr. Lewis Ferguson to give us a call to action, somewhat of a benediction for the day to send us across the street. And the other thing that I forgot to put on a slide, but please know that this is a series of Talk Justice Tuesday. So every Tuesday for the rest of the session, there is another event similar to this on different criminal justice reform topics. If you go to justicea365.com, you will get the schedule of all of the days. They are not usually at this church, they're usually at the Capitol or the LOB. So justicea365.com and you will get the other days, including Justice Day, which is a very large event on February 27th, and that also requires pre-registration, so please register for that event. It's another day where you learn topics and you go across the street to speak to legislators, so please look at that and register. So, Dr. Ferguson. And then if you'd like help, we're going to kind of go in groups across the street if you want to go with a group.
Thank you for this opportunity. Let us rest on our feet if you don't mind. If anybody trying to figure out my pastor, yes I am. We are excited to be here today. We are called for a great responsibility. Everybody in this room has a responsibility. Church leaders have responsibilities. Local community leaders have responsibility. Even our legislature has responsibility to get this problem that we have right. To ensure that everyone has the fair opportunity. I need to grab the mic. Okay, I grabbed the mic. Everyone has a fair opportunity in the state of Georgia as it relates to America at large. How do we do that? Everybody in this room has a fundamental responsibility. If we want to make better people and better citizens, we have to, number one, support each other, support our legislators, and support the programs that we have before us today. This is a battle. This is a fight. This is a fight that we've been fighting for a very long time. How do we win this battle? Everybody in this room has a responsibility. And if we work together to aid our legislators, to aid organizations that are working together, and to know what programs that are out there to help those that are in need, those are the ways that not only can we create better citizens, but we also create a better community. We are charged today to be responsible for what we're experiencing with our incarceration, mass incarceration, things of that nature. All of us here have a duty as human beings to make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity. And that's all we want. Am I right about that? This is all we want. So I challenge every faith leader, every minister, every legislator, every official. Let us learn to unify and work together to make a better state, to make our communities better, and to make our homes better. I charge you this day, as we get ready to go across the street, I charge you to not only participate, but be the best you that you can be. Thank you so much.